It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is my friend Ryan Johnson. We are going to just kind of have an open discussion, a dialogue about sort of the state of the church as we look ahead to 2021 and challenges, good things, and everything in between for the church. I don't quite know where this conversation is going to go, but we're going to go wherever the Holy Spirit leads us. So, Ryan, it's always fun to hang out with you, my friend. Welcome back to the show.
I sincerely appreciate it. You're one of my favorite people in this whole world. Just don't
Wow.
tell anybody else.
Okay. Yeah, we'll be sure to mute that part of the conversation. No, I mean, that is a good thing to bring up, I think, actually, though, because with what we do, we do stuff with in person with people. We are also virtually doing stuff with ministry leaders and friends all over the country. But I feel like there are those people that God brings to you that you get to just be on the journey with. And, from the moment you and I connected about a year and a half ago, I just felt like we were going to be fast friends and kind of be on the journey together. I like your sense of humor. You don't annoy me. Hopefully, I don't annoy you. So I hope we can be doing stuff for the long haul, man.
Absolutely. It is. It's one of those things that just clicks, it works, you love it, you enjoy every moment.
Well, and I feel like God wants every Southerner to have a Northern friend that they can mentor and really help to see how the world is supposed to run. I mean, being from Minnesota, I can't be any more of a Northern Yankee. I mean, I'm as far north almost as they come. And the only place I could go other than that is Canada.
That's right. We have to get you to learn, bless your heart, good barbecue, and the proper gun attire.
Well, I'll work on the proper gun attire. I was just in North and South Carolina for 4 days. I ate lots of barbecue in both places, so I feel like I'm slowly being conditioned to a better way of life. So when I finally arrive, you can let me know when that is.
That's it. We definitely got to get that northerner out of you.
That's right.
Nothing against my northern friends. It's just it's different in this part of the world.
Well, and one of the funny things I know is like the more you're in a location, the more the words, the phrases you use, even your kind of accent will shift. Earlier on in my career, when I worked in software companies, over two different summers, I spent about 6 weeks in Georgia, and I would come home. Sometimes be gone for 2 weeks and then come home for a weekend before going back out, and I would pick up kind of a southern accent temporarily, just from being. That's only being there for a few weeks. I can only imagine the dramatic shift. People will probably respect me more if I pick up more of a Southern accent. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, it will cause your wife to love you just a little bit more.
Well, that's definitely something I need in my life. So thank you for that encouragement. I look forward to that day when our marriage, our love story reaches its full potential. That's something to really aim towards. But on a more serious note, otherwise we'll keep joking all day. I'd sent you an article to kind of frame where we might go in this conversation. So let's start there. Some shifts in California in terms of taking off some of the limitations that they had going on last year for some of the bigger churches out there. They had a lot of extreme restrictions in terms of assembly and worship, and so I don't know that I specifically want to talk about that exactly, but I'm thinking just more of a bigger picture way to start our conversation. So it's been really fascinating to me. I had to travel quite a bit last year. I'm trying to get out at least once a month this year. And it's really fascinating to see the differences from state to state. If you go to a church here in Illinois, you're going to see, a row separation between everybody. A lot of people are still going to be masks and just a lot of different things. Some of that varies from county to county. Some of it varies by the choices of the staff. You go to places like Texas or South Carolina, places further south. A lot more freedom, not as many masks, things being fairly wide open, and so there seems to be a lot of variance in how people are assembling and choosing to worship. Also, in talking with different leaders, especially the last few months, I've had leaders tell me how if their churches stayed open, not only did their like in person uh, assembly like sometimes double, their online folks has sometimes doubled as well. And those are people looking for like full, like they want to be members, they want to start tithing, they're asking to be part of Sunday school classes, and so big picture, what it means to do church has shifted where all of a sudden, even if you have a local church, you're suddenly impacting people potentially on an international scale, going places you never thought you were going to go. So maybe that could be like a big picture kind of frame for where we could go in this conversation. But Would love to just hear a little bit from you, Ryan, in terms of like the people you're interacting with and rubbing shoulders with. What are some of the various things you've seen? Because I know you were up on the East Coast a couple of months back. Very different there than where you live versus where I live. So, give us your perspective on lockdown, open. What do you see?
Yeah, it's definitely different across the board, and I think where we're easily to get in trouble is to look at our region and compare it to everywhere else and think that one is greater or lesser than the other. I do travel. I'm here in Eastern Tennessee in the Great Smoky Mountains, and where we're at, our home church, we've been wide open for the whole time. We don't have a in the county where we're at, we don't have a mask mandate for churches. Now, there is a mask mandate in the county, but it's not aggressively enforced. There's a lot of places that you can walk into and they will not say anything if you don't have a mask on or not. It's very left open to a lot of people. But I mean, we have people that attend church on Sunday. Some wear masks, some don't. It's not something that is required or expected. We don't have social distancing in our congregation, but if I go to another place and I have been traveling, I've there was a church I was at not long ago. Their denomination enforced them to separate and do every other pew or every other row, and so they had to have it taped off. And some of them even said that their insurance companies were requiring them of this, and it really puts a big picture on things that there's a lot of pastors having to make difficult decisions because of multiple facets of influence. Some is the county, some is the state, some is the federal government, whatever the case may be, insurance and so on and so forth. And so it has been extremely challenging for a lot of pastors to abide by this and do. I think, even in sending the abiding, I don't think I've ran into a single pastor or know of a single pastor that is willing to do something for the sake of harming a single individual. These pastors are having to make decisions that they've never been faced with before. But at the same time, it's challenging because you got pastors that want to open up, such as in California, but they're in a partial lockdown per se. Those churches in California, 25%. And that doesn't really seem like, too much to ask. But, I got to thinking about this, Shaun. For a congregation, let's say a congregation of 5,000 people, they can have on Sunday morning 1,250 people. And that's still a good congregation. But what about the church that only has 50 attendees? That congregation is permitted to have 12. Well, in my case or your case, that's our family,
Pretty much.
especially your case. Mine, we're a family of six. The congregation of 75 people can only have 18 people. So it puts us so much pressure on these leaders, but we really got to be careful because here in Eastern Tennessee, we have a lot of liberty to do things and host things. Again, if I go into a restaurant, they may say, "Hey, we ain't going to seat you until you put your mask on." But the churches from day one, there's been no limitation on the church. Federal government buildings, local government, got to wear the mask. But there's been a lot of liberty here, whereas other places it has not been.
Just to kind of jump off of the point you're making there, Ryan, one of the things that I would love to see, whether we're talking about shifts in California or elsewhere, is I don't know that we should necessarily base things on congregation size, because, like you said, that's a weird slippery slope. Whether you have 5,000 or 50, that 25% gets weird. I would like to see it based on more size of the facility, like what can the facility safely, reasonably accommodate, and really it's been interesting. I guess the thing that I really liked about the progress they're making in California is I feel like they're taking into account that, at least to some degree, they've been treating churches differently from stores or other public venues. And California, it's been very locked down, but other places we've seen, over the course of last year, lots of assembling in the streets for various different reasons, whether it was to let your voice be heard or to celebrate a sporting event, this, that, or the other thing. We can point to tons of examples of situations where people assembled, masked, unmasked, and everything in between. Yet churches, it seemed, for whatever reason, were more harshly scrutinized, locked down, forced to have some severe limitations on their ability to assemble. So I will say to some degree, what does give me some hope with what I see happening out in California is that there seems to be at least a minor acknowledgement of, oh, we've actually been treating churches differently than every other aspect of what's happening in society. So to me, maybe that's a little bit of progress where we can go, oh, this is kind of an apples to apples thing. This part isn't an orange over here.
Yeah, I would definitely say minor. My thought automatically goes to, I live in Eastern Tennessee, but I'm originally from Alabama. So naturally, I'm a University of Alabama fan. And on January, whatever date it was, Alabama won the national championship. Well, in Tuscaloosa, pictures went crazy because everybody went to the streets in Tuscaloosa, Alabama to celebrate it. And people started retweeting, even on Facebook, sharing the massive crowds of, college students and adults celebrating the victory. And they were going super spreader events. This is horrible. These people are killing people, blah, blah, blah. So I started actually doing some research on some of these people that were saying that. And I was fascinated to find just a couple of days after that, they were sharing the people in the street celebrating the inauguration of President Biden. And back before that, the election of President Biden and celebrating in the streets and everything. And so there's this little bit of contradiction on a lot of levels. But the reason I say minor towards the churches, you still have places like San Diego who opened up gentlemen clubs, but churches can't. But I know we can't make a mountain out of a molehill, and we got to pick which hill we're going to die on. But again, it is minor victories, but this is one of those things that we have to turn our focus to, because it is such a great thing. Because if I have a facility that can seat 5,000 people, that facility is pretty large and open, right? Whereas if I have a church that can only seat 75 comfortable, it's a closed quarter. So the restriction may look a little different because of the facility, but none of this is being taken into account in this. And it does feel like levels of persecution against Christianity. Do I believe it is all out persecution? No. However, I do believe there are some roots that are attached to it that is setting the church to be persecuted in different levels, which is why this is so important to the body of Christ, to be able to recognize that the church still has to be recognized in this situation. Because if we can open up casinos, we can open up restaurants, we can open up, the gentleman clubs and such. How come we're not able to open up these churches in different scales, in different formats as well?
Yeah, I think the big thing is who gets to decide what's an essential service effectively is the question at hand. I guess one of the things I would say is in terms of all of the interesting places like Gentlemen's Club, which is a very generous way to to phrase that, or a dispensary or a liquor store or abortion clinics. I would kind of lump that as kind of under all the places that sin taxes are collected, if you will. I mean, those are all revenue generating things by and large for the for the government, versus the church is a tax exempt entity. So that is an interesting thing to think about. But who gets to decide what's essential for society to function? And clearly, by and large, across much of society last year, the church was not on that list.
And that's such a great point, because, I was listening to a radio show out of the state of Alabama, and the radio hosts were deemed essential workers. And so they're actually at the top of the list to be able to get a vaccine. Now, they're radio personalities, that's what they are, but they were deemed essential workers. Well, if I go back to California and I look at what is, essential workers, or I go to any state of essential workers, how are we not looking at clergy as essential workers, or a church, especially when we have an increase of depression, suicide? We have an increase of just violence in general, because people are getting bored and they're becoming, where they're breaking into. I'm not talking about rioting and looting. I'm just talking about in general, people are breaking into homes and stealing because it's there to do when boredom hits. But none of these things are actually being considered, even unfortunately, with all the deaths. There's my wife's grandmother had just passed away. just recently, and I called. She was in the state of Georgia, and I called a pastor friend there before she passed away, and I said, "Hey, can you get to the hospital right now? My wife's grandmother's dying, and my wife is on the way to try to get there to be with her and stuff and everything." And they wouldn't let him in. They would not let not only though is he clergy, he's part of the hospital, board and stuff there that does some things in there, and you couldn't get in that process. And these things are just fascinating to me because we won't let certain people in to certain places because we're not deeming them essential. Well, at the end of the day, who's making that decision? Government. Government officials are making that decision. And I know that all of them are not evil. I'm not pointing the finger and blaming them all, but you do have a lot of hypocrites that is taking place. I mean, Governor Newsom out in California can't go to a restaurant, you can't sit down. And then pictures come out and he is with a group of large people and he's sitting down. But he's one of many who've done that. Governor of Michigan did that. Cuomo did that in New York, and Bellagio did that as well. And so there's always this stuff that is happening. And I'm not calling for the church to be defensive. I'm not calling for the church to be offensive just for the sake of being that, but we do have to recognize what is taking root in order to make sure that we're not overcome.
Yeah, I mean the phrase that comes to mind, a lot of our conservative kind of podcast and radio people would say this kind of rules for thee, but not for me. And I think at the very least, we've certainly seen a disconnect between policies and practices. Somebody might prescribe this for you, but I'm not exactly going to follow that. And so that's something to really wrestle with. When you see discrepancies like that, you have a hard time buying that. Do you really believe this? You're saying this is how it is, yet you're clearly making choices that make it seem like you don't believe this is actually true. So it's a real hard tension to figure out how to live kind of in between that weird dichotomy of thought. Let's shift now, talking about so we've been at this for a year now. So many things have shifted in the church between in person, online. I think the place I'd like to go next is to talk about what do we do for the people who've never come back. So I can talk to a bunch of different pastors, friends who their congregations have been cut in half in terms of attendance and tithing. You know, I find in a lot of circumstances, people haven't even necessarily followed up with the people that are gone. They just like, oh, COVID, oh, this or oh, that. And, there's a million different reasons you could probably get for why somebody has moved on to a different church, or they're watching something else online, or maybe they just are in a place where they feel like they don't care anymore because their habits have shifted. But I feel like there's a key shepherding piece of at least taking that step to follow up, place a phone call, say, hey, we haven't seen you guys. We want to see how you're doing and make sure you're okay, and make sure that you're having some kind of fellowship. And I can try to read between the lines and go, man, are you just afraid of what they're going to say, or can you not handle them saying that they didn't like what you were preaching about, or that you supported this, that, or the other thing last year? I mean, there are a myriad different reasons as to what people could respond. But I feel like that is one of the missed opportunities I saw last year, and as we've continued to progress into this new year. And my challenge to leaders would be, if you chose not to follow up last year for whatever reason you want to give it, I would challenge you to actually follow up this year and just say, hey, I know you haven't heard from me for a year, but we miss you. We haven't seen you. Just want to make sure you're okay. I mean, even if they're not going to, if they say, hey, I'm not going to come back because I got this other thing that's meeting this need, at the very least, you close that loop and let them know that you actually care, that you see them. I think that's one of the things that happened last year, is people felt like you no longer saw them. So they just moved on to something else.
Yeah, and what I'm about to say is my own thoughts and opinions. So this is where I
Does not
interjected here.
reflect the thoughts of Shaun Tabatt or the Shaun Tabatt. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And no
Disclaimers.
one else, no one else has to agree with me on this, but I genuinely believe the one thing that COVID-19 did for the church was to pull back the veil of how the church in recent years had gotten away from authentic relationships. Somewhere along the way, we become enamored in ourselves where, we have pastors in pulpits, and I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just stating some knowledgeable facts that I know firsthand. They sit in a room, they don't come out until, first or second song is halfway through. They don't associate with anybody. They don't shake hands with anybody, and they get up, they preach their message, they walk out and go straight back to their office, whatever the case may be. And they have people in position to make sure to, keep up with all the information. But somewhere along the way, we failed to remember to be relatable. We failed to let people in our circle, in our life. Are we going to be friends with everyone? Absolutely not. That's not going to happen. I get that. You're not going to like everybody. We're called to love everyone, but you're not going to like everybody. I mean, that's just in all honesty. And I know that there's individuals that will abuse their time with you. There's individuals that will drive you crazy at times. I get all that. But at the end of the day, and I know, let me back up. I know that in larger congregations, you can't have one pastor pastoring 1,000 people and he get to know 1,000 people. I understand that, but we've lost the ability to be what family was intended to be. We've lost that in that. I think COVID has pulled that scale back and that veil to recognize that when we have people in our congregations that have been missing for a year and we didn't even think to ask where they went, or were they upset? Did they have COVID issues? Did they have a death? Did they have,
Did
what?
did they die?
Yeah. These are genuine things that we ought to take a step back and go, wait a minute. At the end of the day, if we're not developing authentic relationships, then what are we actually developing? I think the other side of that is it's also revealed the lost art of discipleship. And I know this is a big thing for you as well, but a lot of churches have been exposed for a lack of discipline. If we have people, and I know that a pandemic has caused a lot of this, do not misunderstand what I'm about to say. There are people that genuinely, we say you need to have faith. We all say that, but they genuinely, they got exposed to a spirit of fear. They embrace the fear and they're still fearful. I understand that. I get that. But at the same time, if we were genuinely growing and maturing people through discipling them into a relationship with Christ, I think we would discover, I believe, that we would discover a group of individuals who are willing to stand the test of time. Those that would stand there and fight. But what happens is because we don't disciple through the word of God, we become quote unquote woke, relevant leaders who are trying to stay culturally relevant to what is the hot topic of the moment. So we don't disciple, we try to stay relevant to that moment. So if a few months ago, it was this topic, and a few months from now, it's going to be this topic. So now, instead of discipling people and growing them through Christ, we're trying to maintain people by keeping them culturally relevant. But the problem with that is that changes every month, and we can't stay on top of that. The truth never changes. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But if we're not discipling, we're maintaining. And people are going to leave in a maintaining program. They're going to remain where they are actually growing.
Well, I think that's one of the big dangers of, I would say, not necessarily being on any kind of a mission. If you, as a leader over a congregation, like there's no clear mission for what your house is about or what you're pursuing, and you're just being kind of led by what the leash of culture, if you will. Whether I want to think of things I've seen in my own local church context here or looking at other churches across the country, there's so many times I'm like, oh, they're doing that. I've seen that on Instagram a bunch lately. Or, oh, wow, they're doing that. I saw Bethel and Hillsong do that 5 months ago. And you can see how much we've gotten to this posture of just mimicking other big churches that we want to be like or that we want to emulate. And well, you know, mimicking something is certainly a way to flatter people. I feel like sometimes we can step into things that are so far out of our lane and out of our assignment. It's great that we're going after something that might be cool, but is that really the best thing that we could be doing? Is that the thing God's calling us to do in our community at this time? I feel like we're sometimes taking on things because it's popular or pursuing things that we don't even have the anointing or assignment for, but it's what everybody else is doing. So we just go for it. I want to jump back kind of on the the shepherding theme. Um, I think of some different hard conversations I've had behind the scenes with different folks lately, and just in terms of the whole shepherding thing, for a local church congregation, if you have a bunch of teaching pastors, 4 or 5, 6 people who preach on your preaching team, but none of them have a shepherd's heart, I can't help but ask the hard question: why are you a pastor? So you have a pastor title because you like the tax exempt status and the benefit that it gives you, but literally, if all you want to do is get up there and teach a message, I might as well go to Bible college to hear from you, because if your heart does not break for your people, if your heart does not wonder why the sanctuary is half empty, like we're like once the shepherd, somebody with a shepherd's heart would go after that. And I feel like we've cheapened kind of what it means to be a pastor to the point where it's just a title we throw around. But I think of the church context I grew up in, like smaller churches, Lutheran. I grew up Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, where at most we'd have like a pastor and an assistant pastor, kind of a thing was the norm, and maybe a congregation from 2 to 500 people. But those guys were doing hospital visits. They were visiting people in their homes. They were doing all kinds of different stuff where they actually got in people's lives face to face, rubbed shoulders with people, and I feel like some of the weird things we've seen the last maybe the last 5 to 10 years, is sort of this embracing of, gosh, if I could be like Bethel, I'm going to try to make this like Bethel. And then this kind of celebrity pastor culture that they're operating within, where I get the great intro music and all these things. And I get on the stage and I do my thing and I go back to the green room or to my office. And that's, it's almost like a conference experience and not a church experience. I feel like last year really showed the kind of the gaping hole in our attempt to do ministry, because if you're only teaching and you don't, your heart does not actually long to connect with and shepherd the people who are in your congregation. I mean, I would seriously challenge you to examine yourself, because that's a massive, massive disconnect, in my opinion.
Well, I even said this the other day in a private conversation, but I can share this information.
I'm glad we're doing this publicly so this can get out.
Yeah. I'll share this aspect of it. It was just some friends and I just talking back and forth. And I said, another aspect of where we're at right now with, you know, COVID and the way things went with the election and so on and so forth, it has also revealed the hierarchy of fivefold ministry, unfortunately, has grown stronger. It is revealed that there's still a lot of, you're not on the same level that I'm on because
Right.
I have this title. And honestly, Sean, it's made me so sick to my stomach. I don't have an impressive story of a church background. We did grow up and attend church some, but I don't have the heritage of pastors and preachers in my lineage and stuff. But nevertheless, I remember as a kid, people used to call the pastor brother so and so. And I told my buddy the other day, I said, I'm at a point now where I just wish people would just call me Brother Ryan or Brother Johnson again, just because I'm so sick of everything else. I'm at a point to where I'm just, because at the end of the day, the only thing that crosses eternity is son. That's the only
Right.
title that crosses is son. I know my function and I know my gifting, but I mean, I have people, they have called me apostle, prophet, pastor, teacher, evangelist. I've had somebody call me reverend before, and you know that's kind of an awkward thing, but nevertheless, I don't get bent out of shape one way or the other. But this hierarchy is not good. It's this. I think it's steeped in self idolatry. I think it's steeped in self righteousness. At the end of the day, the fivefold gifts are a gift to the body of Christ. Apostles and prophets is the foundation of the church, Jesus being the chief cornerstone. But I think we have failed to remember that foundations are established so that something can be built upon them, and we walk on foundations. We establish that to walk on. But what's happening is we got apostles and prophets that are actually walking on others because of this hierarchy. And it's just sad at the end of the day, because if I do have a congregation, when you was talking about the teachers, I immediately thought of this one church that I've ministered at multiple times, back when another pastor was there. I haven't been there since he's been gone, but I remember this church, and he was a teaching pastor. I mean, teaching, teaching, teaching. And he was a good teacher. The problem was when you bring in someone like myself that is not teaching, the congregation had a very difficult time receiving anything that I ministered because it wasn't in the way that they were accustomed to. And this is a problem for a lot of congregations. And then you add on top of it, when you try to mimic, say, Bethel or Hillsong or IHOP, and you try to put it into your region, it doesn't always work that way. Can we learn from those congregations? Absolutely. But when I try to mimic or echo them, I usually find failure and not success. Part of that too is we have this mentality that if I see it there, I'll just echo it and I'll get the same results. But let's be honest, we can look at the genre of a comedy. Not all comedies are the same. We're going to be drawn to the one that makes us laugh. So if I'm trying to echo Bethel, I'm going to be drawn to what actually Bethel is producing versus somebody else that's not, and it's a cheap imitation of it. I think that's a massive problem that has to be garnered attention because you even brought it up earlier about people that are watching online. And I love what we're doing online. I have an online, even in RJM, even our congregation here at Summit Church in Pigeon Forge, even the outreach ministry, Life Changers Outreach, we have online presence, but the church can't become focused solely on online because whatever is maintaining them here in the moment, if there's something that's more flashier, it'll take them in a heartbeat because it's so quick, it's so relative in that. But again, so what's missing in all this is the authenticity of relationship. It's hard to develop a relationship with someone who's strictly online. It's very difficult. It's why even like you and I, for months went by, our relationship was online. And then we worked it out to where we could establish a face-to-face conversation and grow from there. And it will continue to grow from there. This is going to be the challenge that's before a lot of people because if we don't learn how to properly lead people, disciple them, develop that relationship, the next greatest thing is going to take them and pull them away. You just can't concentrate solely on that because, again, the greatest flash is going to be the one to entertain a lot of people.
Right. Well, I think there's no replacement for face to face. I mean, one of my goals this year is just to get out and be in front of leaders, authors, people that we're partnering with or working on stuff with, just to hear their heart, see how they're doing, and just sit across the table, grab dinner, and have a conversation as much as is reasonable. I think we should be trying to do that with the people in our own congregations and just having community, even if it has to be a smaller communities right now. I think that's so important just to be rubbing shoulders and sharpening each other. It's just you're not going to get that same effect online. I'm going to throw away my idea to rename you Level 3 Master Prophet, Ryan. I feel like when you get into you'll see some like self-published books and things on Amazon kind of in our space, and people give themselves these wild titles and like, did we step into like a game of Dungeons and Dragons or something where I'm like a level 4 this or and so some of the titles we give ourselves are definitely interesting, to say the very least. I want to pick back up on the kind of the discipleship theme. I feel like that has been one of the. I almost feel like last year revealed the gaping hole we have in discipleship in the sense that, and that's not to bash the discipleship as it existed. I feel like a lot of the models we have kind of came out of church in the '90s, where it was like, you're a new believer or you're new to this church. We're gonna help you get acclimated to how you be a Christian or how you fit in here. And I almost felt like it was sort of cultural indoctrination, so you don't feel like an idiot or a fish out of water. And once you got through that 4 weeks or whatever, maybe join a small group, maybe go to Sunday school. But you lost that kind of smaller group face to face aspect of like real doing life together discipleship. I can probably count on one hand the churches or ministry schools that I know around the country where there's literally intense multi-year discipleship happening where it might be a larger group at the school, but the kind of cohort groups are 10 or less people with like a real solid established leader like in the lives of those people and discipling them and they're meeting regularly. I feel like that's something that we've really lost across the church, broadly speaking. And that may be one of the gifts of last year as we are forced into a position where we are doing more house church things or several families coming together to whether that's to do a Bible study or maybe, we're coming together to watch a sermon online in somebody's home, it is putting us in a position where we're having a smaller group of people, combining resources, helping each other, just being in more intentional relationship with each other. And so that does excite me, where I think we're going to see more organic discipleship happening, maybe outside of the traditional church models that we've had. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. For me, as a guy who works in publishing, and I'm thinking about, like, I'm trying to think through, like, what resources do we need 3 to 5 years down the road. I don't know that I completely grasp what it looks like to disciple the church 5 years from now. Just given the fallout we've seen after the election, challenges coming yet for the church as a whole in terms of assembly. Um, I feel like our friend Lana Vosser talks about that it's a new era. People keep talking about this is like the third reformation of the church. Uh, I think the next couple years are, for lack of a better way to say it, they're going to be rocky and interesting as we kind of wrestle with our junk. We went through last year. There's a lot of compression, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. I always say sometimes Jesus came out and sometimes something far different than Jesus came out. And we're going to have to process and wrestle with our garbage, maybe the things we got wrong, the things that we did wrong, and figure out how to, I would say, get back in our lane. I feel like we got so far out of our lane or our assignments last year. Um, we really need to just be humble and go, Jesus, where do you need me to be? And go back there and be all about that thing that you're supposed to be doing with a reckless abandonment, and not worry about the stuff that's not yours. But I think that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of challenging effort to get there.
Yeah, I think there are things that people as individuals are going to have to revalue or reevaluate whether or not they actually value it. And, because if I say something right now, if I say, hey, we're going to have a small group meeting, how many of them are going to use? I'm not be doing that. I'm not, because I'm going to expose myself to a virus. And why would I do that? But that same person, realistically, not every case, but, they're going to go to the grocery store.
Right.
They're going to go to, a big box, Lowe's or Home Depot, whatever the case may be. So, what do you really value? And I think that's got to be the most important question going further in discipleship programs, whether it's meeting at a coffee shop, meeting right now. I think a lot of coffee shops would love small groups coming in just for the business of it, not the major chains because they're definitely pretty strict, but some of these mom and pop ones, they're welcoming into that. Homes are going to have to be made available, absolutely, but again, this is going to come back to whether or not a church is going to decide to make that available. And then in the process of making it available, do we even value that? Because unfortunately, we have many, especially in America, and I know it may be in other countries as well, but we have a lot of Christians who say that they want these things, but they never show up for these things. Because at the end of the day, they're satisfied coming to church and having a man or a woman share a message, give them a little bit of encouragement, a pep talk, and that's all they're looking for. But at the same time, they're blaming that they're never being fed. Well, let's talk about shepherding just for a moment. I want to say this. It's not a long thing, but let me say this. I've actually seen shepherds work before. I've been in another country and I saw shepherds work, and I was fascinated about something that I did not see when I saw the shepherds tending to the flock. And this was the thing. A shepherd's responsibility is to lead the flock to pure water and green grass. What I did not see was the shepherd bend down, take a handful of grass and put it in the mouth of the lamb, the sheep, whatever. They didn't cup the water and put the water up to the mouth and let them drink. They simply led them to pure water and green grass. Modern Christianity has this tendency to expect leaders to do everything for them. Leaders lead. It is our responsibilities as individuals to get to the place in which we have been led to and learn how to eat and digest what has been presented to us. We don't always prepare the meal, but we get to partake of the meal. If we're complaining that I left this church because I wasn't being fed, that's a problem on you, not the leadership in this aspect. I'm not saying it's always the case across the board because yes, there are some poor meals being prepared. I'll say it that way. But at the end of the day, what do we really value? Because if I set up a discipleship program online, let me just say it online. I set up these Zoom meetings. If you never log on, that's not my fault. That's your fault as a person. So churches, a lot of churches in some reasons, in some regions, they're going to be able to do discipleship programs through Zoom meetings or whatever the case may be in that aspect. Some can do it in coffee shops, some can do it in their homes. We need to make it available, and then we as individuals need to be held accountable to actually show up to what is being prepared for us.
Well, let's transition into one of my other favorite topics. One of the things I've wrestled with lately, and I don't have a good solution for this. But I think of what it meant to be in ministry or to become a pastor as I was coming up. I went to Bible college. I did a little bit of grad school, seminary. Never did finish my master's degree. But in terms of pastoral training, they tend to be a little bit meaty. Like you would get some exposure to biblical languages and some theology and a smattering of things. Get some homiletics training and whatnot to prepare you to be a pastor. Now, is that required to be in ministry? Absolutely not. And it really varies by the denomination you're in for how much education's valued and whatever that looks like. So if you're a pastor who doesn't have an MDiv or whatever, I'm not raining on your parade. I've wrestled with this because I'm a person who values education. I value Bible knowledge, theology, church history from the perspective of if you have a vacuum where there isn't any of that knowledge present in your leadership structure or broadly in and over your congregation, you can get into a really weird place where all those things that are new under the sun that sound fancy and exciting, they're shiny objects that seem like, ooh, look at that. And if you don't have the context, you don't know that, oh, that was dealt with in the third century, or that was, that's actually what you're saying that you think is cool. That's actually a heresy. And so I feel like we've just entered into this weird place where there's an extreme lack of training in certain parts of the body, and it's concerning. Where the quality of your teaching really starts to diminish, where you just don't have. I feel like the bar has gotten extremely low, where people are good teachers, they're good communicators, they're good presenters, but they just and maybe to some degree, part of the answer is not unlike what you said related to discipleship, where it's kind of on you. If you're in a position to preach and teach, maybe you should really be pressing into that Bible study and going deep and learning as much as you can so you can like properly wield what you're bringing to the stage there, so to speak. But for me, as a guy who works with authors and leaders and just has a passion for the church thriving and doing well, that's something that just gives me great concern in this season, because you can get into a situation where you grew up this group of folks organically under one church umbrella, and if you don't have really hardcore solid discipleship, your team is like a mile wide and like a centimeter deep, and that's very problematic when you're leading and impacting maybe thousands and thousands of people.
It's an interesting aspect of it because I I think right now our generation has more access to wisdom, knowledge, and understanding on multiple topics. Easy access, from our phones to our computers, our laptops. But at the same time, I feel like we're one of the most ignorant generations when it comes to understanding, the simplicity of the Word of God, the foundations of our faith. We have all this access, but we're not tapping into it because at the end of the day, we have become self sufficient on what is retweetable, shareable, and what garners the likes. And so, at the same time of trying to condense everything so that people will pay attention to it, instead of sharing a 5-minute video, we've tried to convince what really took 5 minutes to say, we've tried to condense it in 30 seconds because people watch 30 seconds before they will 5 minutes. And that's how we've taken our study time. That's how we've taken these resources. I mean, how many times have we looked at a book that was, 250 pages long and we went, my gosh, that's too much to read. I'm looking for the book that's less than 100, because my time is valuable. And I get it. I get it to a degree. I get that to a degree because I can turn around and flip that and go, man, you'll sit in a movie theater and watch a superhero for 3 hours and never question that time. And then you'll spend hours trying to understand that whole universe and explain that one scene that didn't make sense to you, just so that you can be able to have an explanation of it. I'm really struggling on that a lot. I don't get it because I'm really fascinated, but I'm frustrated at the same time because we've become cheap imitations of what we have already heard. We're regurgitating messages. We can quote more memes than we can the gospel. I just I'm bothered if I go into your class, if I go into your congregation, your disciple group, whatever the case may be, and I simply ask this question and I say, what's the first commandment? What's the first one? And you can't respond. I'm concerned about that. I'm greatly concerned. I'm concerned when we can't define consecration. But again, here we are. You're talking about all these books, and there's a realistic side to it. If I write a book on consecration, it won't sell. It just there's and that's sad. That's sad where we're at, that we're driving the market based on what makes us comfortable rather than what is actually growing us in order to mature us.
Well, and one thing I would always remind people is as much as you feel like Ryan and I are kicking you right now, we're also preaching to ourselves. I mean, we need these kinds of reminders in our life because we can get in a place where we go watch a movie or we want to Netflix and chill, I guess, as they say, or if that means something derogatory, I have no idea. So I do occasionally watch Netflix, not a lot though.
No,
Um,
I mean, here's the thing too, and I want to reiterate to the people this: I love to be challenged in my thought process. I love to be challenged by that. I strive to be challenged because I don't want to ever feel like that I've achieved this level of perfection. My goal in life is not to be the smartest person in the room, because if I'm the smartest person in the room, what can I learn? I can't
right.
learn anything. And so I want to learn. That's the reason I enjoy talking to people that doesn't believe like me. At the end of the day, is it about agreeing? Absolutely not. It's about challenging that process. I even challenged a group of individuals just the other day on something on forgiveness that when it was all over with, I had people coming up and they're like, I've never thought of this before. And I said, I know that's the challenge of thinking. And
Right.
that's where we're at.
I think the thing that I keep gravitating back towards with what you just said is where are we investing our time and where are we investing our money? And that will often at least tell you where part of your heart is most of the time. And I think the sad reality for all of us to some degree is our heart is often far from the things of the gospel or far from pursuing a deep, intense relationship with God. And I feel like that's a self-examination thing. You got to wrestle with that and what that means for you as an individual. I think as leaders, we need to be in a place where we're not too fancy or too big for our britches to not just like be down in the dirt doing the work amongst just normal people living life, doing life. I like the distinction you made with not having a fancy title. You'll take being brother Ryan, and that is good enough just to be relatable and just that people can connect with you and that sort of a thing. So, I mean, again, I'll get back to what I think I said this earlier. I say it a lot lately. I'm just being in a place where you're willing to embrace the gold that comes out of the compressing season we've walked through and that we're continuing to walk through. Even though it's awful and there have been challenges and there are more challenges on the horizon, embrace it as a gift. When have we been at a time in this nation where we've had to really question everything we know, all of our markers and kind of things to guide our path have kind of been broken and destroyed. We're getting to be in a context where we can see, does my faith actually make a difference? If I can't go to church for a year in person, has my life actually changed at all? Does it really make a difference? Does my faith make a difference in how I vote or how what I see in the news and let alone worldview issues? And we're not going to go there for this conversation. So, but I look at that and I go, we can say it sucked and it was awful. we can also go, that I really had to wrestle with, does my faith actually make any real difference in any sphere of influence or any part of my life? And I think for some of us we might go, actually, this has been kind of nice not having to go to church or whatever, and so it's just something to really wrestle with, because again, where we're making an investment, time, money, whatever it might be, that really shows what's important to us. If we'll spend, you know, 25, 30 hours a week watching Netflix and Amazon Prime and playing video games, and we can't even spend 5 minutes reading our Bible or praying or anything, it just shows us where our priorities are, and uh, that probably should concern us, certainly. And it's just the one thing I come away with from this past year is I look at what various churches did and the way we all kind of struggled and wrestled through this. I'm to a place where, like, does my faith look like something? Does love look like something? Does Jesus manifesting in my life and working through me, does that actually look like something? If all I ever do is complain on social media or speak something on a podcast, I'm literally just talking into the wind. And I do hope that things I might say might influence somebody or help somebody or encourage somebody or get them to buy a book that's going to help change their life. But if I'm all talk and there's absolutely no action that backs up what I say, that's an extreme disconnect. And that is one thing I've seen on display large everywhere, where we say a lot of things, we complain about a lot of things, but we actually don't do anything to reinforce that we believe what we're saying. And that's probably one of the saddest things I saw last year. We were all about whatever the flavor of the day, and we had a lot of words to say, but we're not actually doing anything to reach our community. We're not getting out to help people or be a part of solutions. And so that's a really weird place to be, where we get these ideas and we feel good about expressing them, but there's zero action. It's almost like we're Christians in our head, and there's this little world we've constructed where if we like something, share something, say something, we feel like we're actually accomplishing something because, oh, I showed them on social media, but we don't do anything to impact anybody positively for the gospel. That that just scares the heck out of me. I mean, I feel like last year exposed just what a sad state we are in right now, and that something needs to change.
Yeah, and I know we've went on, so this may have to be a part 1 and part 2 episode here. But most of your listeners may not know, recently I went through a health episode. I've never had COVID. I've been around multiple people has had it, but I've never had it myself. And a couple weeks ago, I was actually supposed to be getting on a plane and flying to another state and minister, and my wife's grandmother passed away. And so I had to change my plans because the day I was flying out was the day of her funeral. So we drive down to Georgia. I spoke at her funeral. We come back that night. Well, the associate pastor here at the church, his father passed away. So he was supposed to preach that Sunday, and I ended up having to step in for him on Sunday. So I wasn't scheduled to preach. I preached Sunday. Everything's fine. I preach. And this whole thing was, at the end, we were going to fight for the salvation. And I knew that the Lord said someone in-house and online. And so we did. We prayed and we fought. There was a young man that came to Christ in-house. And then there were some people that came to Christ online while watching online. Well, Sunday night rolls around, everything's fine. I'm good. At 10 o'clock, I start hurting across my sternum, across my chest. By 1:30 in the morning, I'm in the ER in severe pain. By 8 o'clock Monday morning, they discover I have several small blood clots in the bottom of both of my lungs. And, the doctor's asking all these questions. We're trying to figure out what's going on. And I said, man, I was supposed to fly on Saturday. And he looks at me and he goes, that could have killed you, had because we didn't know about the blood clots. And there's this kind of this moment of, whoa. And I looked at my wife and I said, your grandmother saved my life. Well, we go home Monday evening, everything's good. Tuesday, I start hurting again. I'm back in the hospital Tuesday evening, and I'm in the worst pain. I thought early Monday morning was pain. I'm even in more pain than ever before. And we roll around to Wednesday and they can't figure out what's going on. All my tests are good. I'm showing healthy. Everything's good. And then they finally discovered they can't find my gallbladder. And so in one of the tests, and so the doctor comes in and says, we think your gallbladder's bad, so we're just going to remove it. And I'm like, whatever. I'm in pain. Get it out. Let's go. Well, they were going to do it on Thursday. And so an hour later, they come back and go, we got to get you in surgery now. And I said, well, what is it? For the first time, all my tests had been normal. Everything was good. The first time my white blood cells went up and said, they said, something's wrong. So they go in there and they discover that my gallbladder was gangrene. It was swelling. And the main, tube that connects to the liver had detached from the liver and the poison was seeping into my body. So there's this moment that the surgeon tells us this, and we're like, wait, what? Because I had no symptoms of anything. And he goes, yeah. He says, if we had waited, you could have died because your body could have went septic and this and that. And then you're just kind of sitting here going, okay, in 3 days, I almost die twice. But God intervened. And then there's this realization that had they not known about the blood clots, I could have died on the operating table. So there's 3 moments where I could have left this earth. And Shaun, I'm sharing all this to say this. I'm in the hospital and it hits me that sorry. Um the last thing that I possibly could have ever done ministry wise on this earth was lead somebody to Christ. And it was this moment where I'm in the hospital and I was never scared. I was never in panic mode or anything like that. It was this moment where I went, I'm happy about that. I'm happy that the last thing I could have done ministry wise was lead someone to Christ. It wasn't a prophetic word. It wasn't a prophetic movement. It wasn't a revival cry. It wasn't even a revival. It wasn't this or that. It was fighting for someone out of the flames of hell, pulling them out of the flames of hell to see them led to Christ. I'm past all this and I'm sitting and I'm turning back and I'm going, you know what? I want to do that more than I've ever done that. Salvation has always been important to me. It's something I've always focused on, but it's charged me even more because, and I don't mean to dumb anything down. I've written books. I'm a podcast host. I travel. All those things feel trivial to me right now because it's about seeing people come to the kingdom. And at the end of the day, our discipleship programs, our church services, our online services, if we're not seeing people led to Christ, if we're not seeing those individuals discipled, then what are we really doing?
Well, I think that really connects to one of the themes I've been chewing on so far throughout 2021 is I feel like we're in a back to basic season in the sense where it starts in our own home, it starts in our own prayer closet and in our own quiet time, reading our Bibles, praying, listening to what the Father has for us to hear from Him, to know what we should be doing, being on assignment. Then that goes into our marriage and into our family. And once we've taken care of our own house, then it spills out into our community. And just, it's about doing life with people and being Jesus to people. And that being a Christian looks like something, loving other people looks like something, and it's a lot more than sharing memes and just saying kind things to people. If the people who are hurting around you, all you do is like, brother, be blessed and well fed, and you just go on your way, that's really sad. If the whole, I would say, if the Holy Spirit prompts you to do something, I don't care what it is, even if it's crazy. Feed somebody, give somebody money, give somebody a car. I don't know what it is. I feel like it's different. Like as we go about our day, God highlights situations and people to us. And if we just are obedient and do it, God usually blesses it. I was just talking with a good friend of mine yesterday when I was sitting at the airport, and he and I have known each other for probably about maybe almost 10 years. We met through podcasting. I meet all my cool friends through podcasting. Ironically, like if I list like my top five like best friends, and you would be on that list. I've met all of you through podcasting, so I'm thankful for the medium. And you met my friend Rod Tucker. He and I literally, God always has us on the same track. God is showing us the same things in each other's lives. And we were catching up yesterday. And I was like, I'm in this weird stage where I didn't grow up in a church culture that was all about like sowing and reaping and if God tells you sow into this and sow into that. And I was just saying, there's been a couple circumstances where God said, "Hey, bless this person, do this or that with money." And my wife and I got 10 kids. God's saying to give away money. It feels painful, but we've just learned to be obedient. And in both circumstances that recently, like the money it rebounds, it comes right back through just some random place. And Rod said, he's like, God's teaching me that same principle where they've given sacrificially into different things. He's like, but then I'll get a preaching invitation and they'll give me like a $300 honorarium for preaching. Or randomly, my mortgage company gave me a check for $800 for some miscalculation. And so, all that to say, like, I'm discovering one of the things God's teaching me when I'm obedient to whatever He's calling me to do, whatever it might be. There's fruit on the other side of it, and I'm learning to trust what I'm hearing from the Holy Spirit and trust what the Father's trying to lead me into doing. And I feel like that's I don't know if I want to say it's a skill set, but I feel like relationally with God, the more we press into that, then the more we're like, I am hearing what God's asking me to do or calling me to do. I feel like it allows us to go deeper and step further into that. And that's hard to do. It can be scary to do, um, but that only comes if I feel like if we're quiet, if we're spending time really getting to know the Father, getting to be in relationship, and that's going to cost you something, primarily your time. And we are in a season where we need to be investing in that relationship first, and that will spill out into all the other places we influence in our marriage, in our family, in our congregations, in our city, whatever it might be. And it's probably the best investment we can be making right now, because, like you said, if we're not about going after in getting people introduced to Jesus and taking care of that as like a primary focus, all the rest of it's kind of worthless. It's not bad to give somebody a prophetic word to encourage them or this, that, or the other thing. But if and I would say this, I was thinking about this yesterday in relation to prophetic words and kind of the fallout after the election. If the prophetic words we're sharing aren't pointing people back to Jesus, aren't steering people into the kingdom, or that should probably concern us. When somebody gives you a prophetic word, weigh it against what the truth is in Scripture. Weigh it against, is this like further the kingdom and steer people back to Jesus? That's really one of the things you really need to wrestle with. And so we really need to be about those primary things, and just let everything else go by the wayside. And that's hard because you know what? We know how to do church and do faith and do Christianity without doing any of those things because the focus has been lost. So we probably need to let go of all the trappings that have largely been stripped away over last year, and actually let our faith be something a little bit more pure, a little bit more pointed to what we might call a traditional pursuit of the gospel, a traditional pursuit of Jesus. And it's not sexy, it's not fancy. It's actually extremely, like, it seems like it's super boring. But again, being out there in the dirt, getting your hands dirty, just loving on people and doing what God asks you to do, that's where we need to be. And that smaller group one-on-one kind of ministry and interaction, I'll take the fruit of that all day long over kind of the super shallow talking to thousands. Show me a group of people where you're discipling 100 people hardcore. The fruit of what's going to come out of that community is going to be intense. And I'd rather see that replicated everywhere right now than kind of our own old model. So, I mean, stuff is broken, but let's embrace maybe the new normal that God's trying to invite us into.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of churches, they have a community service, but they haven't learned how to be a service to their community.
Boom, we can just drop the mic there and just thank you for watching the show. Well, I think it's almost time for us to wrap up. What would be your parting word, your encouragement, your prayer, I guess maybe your challenge? I mean, you and I are about the same age. We function in different aspects of church ministry life with the different things we do. We've clearly got strong opinions on certain things, as you might have figured. But like, you go first, and then I'll go. In terms of like, for people who listen to this, watch this, if they hear one thing out of what you've shared with us, say like, what's that like taker, like just go after this. This is like the most important thing for 2021.
Yeah, I think the greatest thing that we can do is stop competing against one another and start learning how to co-labor with one another. None of us have it figured out. None of us are doing it exactly right. We all got room to grow. We all got room to change. We all got room to be challenged. I can learn from you. You can learn from me. we can figure out, what works best in each region, that we're not cheap imitations of what someone else is already doing. But again, this all stems from not being competitive. I'm sick of being competitive. Who's got the nicest shoes on? Who's got the most expensive belt on? And who's got this or who's got that? And I like the way they preach and they don't preach. I listen to people that literally bore me to death at times, but it's because of what they have. It's the knowledge that they have that I can pick up in that wisdom. And so if I only listen to those that is in my vein, then how am I really growing? My spiritual growth is going to be stunted. So admit it. We don't have all the answers. We have been out strategized lately, and we need to learn how to develop a better strategy for our regions.
Well, since it's my show, I'm going to give two things to give people as a takeaway. Um, One of the things I would say is stop kicking people when they're down. You and I both have friends who have taken the brunt of a lot of the fallout with prophetic
So
words
good.
related to the election. And you and I both know lots of folks. They're trying to process, figure out what they got wrong. They're walking in repentance. They apologize publicly. They're under mentorship and solid leaders who are in their sphere, who are advising them and walking with them, and they're doing everything they can to operate with the utmost integrity. And yet people are like basically saying, why don't you just like cancel everything about who you are in your ministry and your life and go hide somewhere because we should never have to hear from you again? That's unfair. If it was any other circumstance or situation, somebody's embezzled money, they had an affair, and they publicly repent and go under some kind of an accountability scenario for the long term, we would be like, you go, wow, we're so proud of you. Thank you for walking in integrity and going how, and yet in this circumstance, we're saying that's not okay. So I feel like we need to stop having unrealistic expectations. That's just ridiculous. So have a little bit more grace. Maybe look at the log in your own eye and deal with your own stuff. Because a lot of these folks are trying to deal with everything the best way they know how. So cut them some slack. And the other thing I would say in terms of we need to maybe look to having some older mentors. One of the challenges I saw last year amongst millennial leaders and Gen X leaders is we went to our peers. We didn't know how to lead through the difficult situations we faced, and so we went to social media and we went to everybody our own age. And boy, did we go some fascinating directions last year. But we're not talking to the mothers and fathers and the grandmothers and grandfathers. The best things I've learned in terms of my faith walk, the people who sharpen and challenge me, some of them, like my good friend Chad Norris, he's 5 years older than me, but the dude's deeper in some things that I'm not deep in. So I learn stuff when I hang out with him. But especially, I think of folks like Mario Murillo or Bill Johnson, or I could list a bunch of professors, people I've encountered through the year, men and women who, are 10, 20, 30 years further down the path than me. Those are the people that have profoundly shaped my life, where I can ask them questions like, well, how did you deal with this in your family, in your marriage, in your church context? People, they've got the scars and the bruises and the strength, and the wisdom on the other side of that. And so there's nothing wrong with consulting our peers. We should definitely be able to dialogue with our peers, but please start building relationships with people older than you. Your peers are just as dumb as you are. My peers are just as dumb as I am because we grew up under the same context. We had most of the same experiences. And so have some humility and find a way to invite some older people into your life. Now, with what I do, with what Ryan does, we do have access to an interesting group of folks just with the relationships we have. And that's a privilege just for the spaces we operate in. Even if that's not the context you're doing life and ministry in, find people in your circles and your spheres where you can just be in relationship and accountability with. And I don't think you'll regret it, because for 2021, I think we are going to be navigating increasingly difficult spaces in culture and in the church. And it's not going to be easy peasy circus fun time. There are going to be challenges. And quite honestly, we're going to need wisdom and people who've been through hard things before who can speak into our lives. If you had a lot of challenges as a leader last year, just going to your peers, you're going to face equally as hard of challenges this year. You're going to need a bit more wisdom and people who can really be in the trenches with you to get to wherever God's leading you to go. So that would be my challenge. Stop kicking people when they're down and get some older, wiser people speaking into your life, and you definitely won't regret it. Ryan, as far as people connecting with you, tell us what's your podcast? What can people expect when they subscribe and listen, and where can we find you on the web?
Yeah, the website is ryanjohnson.us, and you can find all the links. You can find the links to the podcast. The podcast is called The Blacksmith Chronicles. There's a reason behind it's that. You can learn that as well along the way. You get a little bit of a mixture. I interview guests from different varieties. Actually, I just interviewed a pastor who's also a movie producer, who's also a manager. And then I just also interviewed a U.S. representative. So, there's a little bit of variety. And then sometimes you get me when I've preached a live message somewhere, or I may do a solo thing at the same time. But the website has those links, has all my links to my books that are out, our store. We got t-shirts, hoodies, all that other stuff as well. But we're on social media. You can find me as an individual. You can find the Blacksmith Chronicles as well. So that's all out there on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, MeWe, all that. So we're all out there, some form or fashion. But we also have a YouTube where you can see, kind of like we're doing here through a Zoom. We record the podcast, and you can actually see that live and stuff as well and everything. So the YouTube is under Ryan Johnson Ministries. So we're trying to get a goal of 1,000 subscribers. So I need everyone who subscribes to Shaun Tabatt's come over to my side and subscribe as well.
Yeah, if you've been able to put up with me and my show, you're gonna love. You'll probably love Ryan more than you actually love me. Like we do with every episode, we'll have links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Ryan, find out more. If you can't get enough of my voice, I actually read the intro and outro for Ryan's podcast. So if you're like, man, there's just not enough Shaun in my life, you can listen to his show and hear me do some reading, and then listen to Ryan interview his fantastic guests. We actually interview a lot of the same guests just because Ryan and I are in close proximity and in a lot of the same circles. What's fun for me about that is I have my style, things I like to go after. Ryan has his style. And so if you listen to his interview and my interview with the same guest, we go totally different places. We pull on different things that we're excited and passionate about. So if you want to get a couple of different perspectives with a lot of the guests, you could subscribe to both of our shows. And I think you will be blessed for it. You should go out and do that right now. So, anyways, Ryan, always a pleasure to hang out with you, my friend. I appreciate you. I love you. You're one of my best friends. Love being on the journey with you.
Hey, I love you, bro. It means a lot to me. I love every aspect. We're going to get you down here in the South too.
Amen. Amen. My life will be better for it.